All right, how's everybody doing today? Thanks for joining. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I'm pretty loud, so microphone's usually not a good idea, but I know in this space it's probably a necessity. My name is Mike Towers. I'm the Chief Security and Trust Officer at a company called Veza. We're at booth 780. If anybody wants to stop by for any Q&A afterwards, in 20 minutes I'm not going to be able to probably take any questions. Maybe, we'll see. But absolutely willing to continue the conversation after my talk. I've been a CISO for almost 20 years. Before I joined Veza, I went from big enterprise CISO to the product side. And the reason why I did that is that as a CISO, and not only am I obviously was a CISO myself, but I'm pretty well connected to the CISO community. Identity security, in my opinion, is the most underserved area of security for the last 20 years. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and why we need a completely disruptive approach to how we solve identity problems. And hopefully, I'm going to talk a lot as a practitioner about why that is. And of course, recognizing that at Veza, we're building something we believe is fundamentally a different approach and the right approach to solve these problems. So we'll get into that a little bit shortly. A little bit of audience participation, because this will come back a minute. How many people flew to get here? And how many people are staying in a hotel? All right, we'll come back to that shortly, why that's important. All right, so the reason why, there's a lot of reasons why identity security needs a complete reboot. There's a couple of those examples on this screen, but I'm going to talk about a couple of those areas. Another audience participation question. How many of you come from an enterprise or a company where you're running your business on only one platform? How about under 5? How about under 10? How about under 20? Most companies don't run their enterprise on less than 50 or so platforms. But most of the identity solutions that we've been using were built when we were. Conceptually, they were built when the world revolved around things like Active Directory and SAP, which are obviously still both around, but everything else has changed quite drastically. The level of variability in where our data can be copied is extraordinary, and it's growing. By the time we leave this presentation, your business may add another SaaS platform that your data could be moved to. And a lot of those platforms are storing data, they're managing data, they're stewarding data. But when we all log in every morning, or when we log in even in our personal lives with something like a Google or a Facebook that gives you a unified authentication experience, that's available to you because of standards like FIDO and SAML. There's no such thing as a standard for permissions. And permissions and entitlements are the fundamental root of identity security. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there's an urgent need to shift identity security away from workflow-driven to data-driven, and away from access-driven to permissions and entitlements-driven. And we need to obviously think about visibility, intelligence, and control first, because given all this variability, having the visibility and intelligence across all these platforms is table stakes. That's the most important first step. And the other thing that we'll talk about here, and I'll mention, is no matter how robust, no matter how big our teams are, no organization, maybe there's a handful of the big banks, frankly, but not many, the 95% of the organizations out there, to have a central group manage all access permissions across all your business isn't going to scale, because it changes too quickly. And frankly, who in your central identity teams knows enough about the business to drive who should have that access? The business needs to understand that and take a little bit more accountability. And because of all the variability that I mentioned, it needs to be able to cover all of these platforms that we've been deploying over the years. So, quick history lesson. There's been a lot of innovation and a lot of new, or at the time they were new, but a lot of identity security solutions are actually, I used to be, a weird career thing, I used to be a journalist, so I got hung up on words. There's a difference between identity and access management and identity security. Identity and access management has come a long way over the years, and we've gotten these great technologies like PAM or we had great advancements in single sign-on, or there's been a lot of companies that have been trying to do IGA for a while. And then you've got other parts of the zero trust framework. You've got, some of them are here today. You've got companies like Zscaler and Palo Alto doing a great job with network security. You've got CrowdStrike moving malware detection to the cloud. You've got a lot of innovation going on in the security space. I've been doing this for a long time. I bought plenty of security tools, but we still can't answer that question at the bottom. Who can take what action on what data? We have a lot of solutions that can tell us who can get into platforms. We don't have any solutions that can tell us what you can do once you're inside them, or not nearly enough. The main reason why that is that fundamentally speaking, identity and access management is rooted in directories, users, and groups, which had its day. It's a really, really nice way to organize your data. It's like a tree structure, looks like an HR org chart, but I would posit to you all it does nothing for security. It's good for managing operations, but doesn't help you with security. Why? Because security, your posture of security when it comes to who can access your data and who can take what action on your data is an amalgamation of the roles, permissions, and resources that they have on all the platforms. And as I mentioned before, the fundamental challenge is, let's think about some of the platforms that are in use in most major enterprises today. I'm just going to name a few. It's not obviously an endorsement, but O365, Salesforce, Snowflake, Databricks, ServiceNow, Workday, Veza, Coupa, Concur, SAP, you name it. All of them treat the far right on this slide independently. So who can keep track? Who has the resources to understand how all those platforms handle permissions? But that's where the permissions are being applied, and that's where effective permissions are being inherited, and what gives people the access that they can do on that on those data sets. So back to my question before about a plane or the hotel. I mean, maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it holds. How many people would be comfortable going into an airport where all of the eggs are at the TSA basket, but once you're in the airport, you can get any plane you want and go anywhere you want, sit in any seat you want? That's how most of our identity solutions work today. We focus on the front door. We don't focus on the actions once you're past the front door. Same with hotels. Who would be comfortable staying in a hotel where they can go to any room they want? That's how most of our identity solutions work today. We're very, very good at understanding who can get in. We're not nearly good enough at understanding what actions they can take once they're in, because it's rooted in the far right. Permissions, resources, and roles. Our friends here at AWS, anybody have any idea how many permission settings AWS has? 107. Anyone understand how many permissions ServiceNow has? About 45. Snowflake, 67. O365, dozens. All of these permission settings are unique to those platforms. And they're changing all of the time. So we can't keep track of that. The entire data model needs to change. So we believe, and I believe as a longtime CISO, that it needs to start with a data model. So what we've built is a data model that we call the access graph that basically connects to all of the systems that you run in your business. Obviously, the newer ones, we communicate via API. The older ones, you can connect with some sort of custom integration. But we basically take the identity data, the roles, permissions, and resources, and we graph them together to give you a picture of effective truth of what your permission landscape looks like. And this is all in a graph data model. The legacy solutions I mentioned before, most of them are built on either a tree structure or relational databases. They can't scale to solve this problem. An average organization would say, I know obviously this is a big company, but just to use the math, an organization with roughly 20,000 employees and maybe 40 or so platforms, with the level of permission settings that exist across those platforms and across those employees, you're up over 1 billion. That's how many combinations you have. And you also need to understand how this links together. How can an identity in the far left get certain level of access to a resource on the far right? And are your alert conditions aware of anything that can happen in one of these silos? So for example, if I have write access to a highly sensitive table in Snowflake, who is keeping track of whether or not the users that have that access have disabled MFA? It's a problem with looking at this in silos. You have to graph the data together to understand the types of linkages that exist and understand what true permissions are inherited for these users. The last thing that we need to do with this data model is we need to unify. I mentioned before the variability. Variability is one of the biggest problems we have in securing our environments nowadays. Those of us who maybe took a computer science or computer engineering degree, there are 4 fundamental permissions to a piece of data: create, read, update, or delete. So the data model needs to understand and normalize down to one of those 4 actions consistently across all your platforms. So whether or not you can update a table in Snowflake, or it can update a SharePoint file or folder, or you can update a table in a module in SAP. Because think about what I said before about democratizing access. That unification is required because, again, the way that I think the future's going, no central team can keep up with all this on behalf of their business. They can provide the data model for it, but who should control who has access and who can take what actions to your commercial data? Your commercial business leadership. Any security team that thinks that they should be the be-all, end-all decision maker for that, they don't understand the business enough to do that. They could try, but commercial should do that. Your data organization, your R&D organization who understands your data, they're the ones who understand this data, and they need to be given the tools to manage the access to that data. But if you're going to give them an AWS console with 107 security sessions, they're not going to have a clue what that means. So giving them a dashboard that understands and normalizes the security model is really, really important, and what we've built and fundamentally built with this data model. The Veza platform has about 250 out-of-the-box integrations. Again, I'm not going to pitch our product as much. You can stop by booth 780, but there's a lot of the products that we have in this 250 integrations that are the fundamental core to many businesses. Most businesses run either Okta or Entra AD at the front door. Most businesses run O365 or Google. Most businesses run Salesforce or another type of CRM solution like a Viva or an IQVIA if it's in the healthcare side. You know, most businesses run SAP, Oracle, ERP. There's these systems that fundamentally, least common denominator, are the backbone for most businesses, and that's what we've prioritized. Of course, we have custom systems that we can integrate and get that data in here as well. But we look at the entire picture. The other thing that I would mention here that I think, frankly, some of the other product areas don't do a good enough job in, frankly, where at least we've tried to prioritize this, is understanding this problem is horizontal. It's not vertical. What I mean by that is if you have data platform like Databricks or Snowflake, or if you have a SaaS platform like Salesforce, or Workday, or ServiceNow, or if you have a cloud infrastructure like AWS, or God forbid I say it here, GCP or Azure, a solution that only looks at one of those 3 silos isn't going to help you because your data is horizontal. It's gone across all. So having the ability to recognize it consistently across those different data types and platform types is also very, very important. As a longtime CISO, I spent a lot of time with business leaders on recognizing how security and how risk is important when it comes to business initiatives. The reason why I bring this up is that everything I just discussed is pretty difficult and is changing all the time. Your business is constantly doing things that make this more difficult and introduce more variability and introduce more challenges. You know, obviously cloud and digital transformation, a DevSecOps approach, those things are making technology much more ubiquitous across the businesses. How many people are in organizations where your CEO, your leadership says, we got to figure out a way to harness the power of AI? Well, you know what AI means, right? It means non-human identities accessing your data all day long, which is another really, really important challenge in the access control space. How do you, if you're not sure what actions can be taken on your data, how can you be sure that your models are being trained properly? Sorry for the geeky question. How many Karate Kid or Cobra Kai fans? Anybody know who Mr. Miyagi is? What's Mr. Miyagi's line? There's no such thing as a bad student, only a bad teacher. If you don't have your data under control, your AI is not going to do much help for you. So this is critical to understanding the actions of your data. But again, most people don't have their data on only one platform. Just when you think you've got everything under control, or at least somewhat, you can breathe a little bit easier, then your company decides they're going to do an acquisition. or a divestiture or a restructuring, and it all changes again. You've built up your organization to understand the data model for AWS, and you acquire a company whose standard cloud platform is Azure. This is another example. So this, and then in terms of the business enablement, one of the worst things that can happen to a business is if you acquire a company and the people you acquire don't have access to the data for the rest of the company has. All of these business changes make the security and the access control within the security models really, really important. And the last thing I'll touch on is supply chain resilience, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit of a different context here. Supply chain, of course, could mean, from a life sciences context, for example, if you sell a drug that is based on a syringe, then of course the syringe provider is an important part of your supply chain, the physical supply chain. When you get your package from Amazon Prime, the box that it comes in is part of the supply chain. But supply chain resilience in this context is every organization depends on third-party users coming into their environment and accessing their systems. So the human capital of supply chain. But the challenge that we see with most organizations, I know I face it in a couple of my CISO gigs, you may be really good at understanding what your employees need, but most companies struggle with what their contingent workforce needs. They're third-party users. And one of the reasons why that is that how many people have HR organizations who take full accountability for the third-party users in their environment? Some of them do, but not many of them do. So businesses are under, the business leadership control the contingent workforce. So again, having the visibility to understand the access chains is fundamentally critical. So our vision spans a couple of chapters here. I've talked about the importance of the data model. But once the access data, the access model is built, the access graph is built, you can understand and visualize, then you can start to remediate toxic combinations. I have write access to 100 of the most sensitive revenue tables in a company, but I only ever use 10 of them. Why do I have that much access? Just as an example. Visualization is important, but without action, it doesn't bring much value, so that's a really, really important. And then the third is control. How do I implement secure policies? How do I make this real time? I've been doing this for a long time. I don't want to sound like the old guy in the room, but there's so many things we do in identity management that are fundamentally rooted in the fact that we think we've screwed up. Quarterly access reviews is the best example. Quarterly access reviews is something that we all do because we assume somewhere in the quarter there's mistakes been made. Wouldn't it be nice to have the data to know what our access posture is in real time and only look for corrections when they go awry? Or what about, just fundamentally speaking, why can't we make an assumption that our access is right and our access is not wrong? Because again, access management is not about workflow. It's first and foremost, it's about data. And understanding the access permissions across your data chain and your platforms. Last thing I'll end on is this concept of that many of us who've been in security and technology for a while, we always understand the concept of least privilege. Least privilege is the North Star, the Holy Grail that we've all been striving to achieve for a while. But not many people are actually marching toward the path of least privilege, because you know what the easy button is you give people access to everything. We call it over-provisioned scores. How many people in your organization are using the access posture they've been granted? Close to, like, I would say 100%. Most users in most enterprises have about 8 to 10 times of the access they need to do their jobs, if not more. And they have write access to stuff they have no business having access to. So the concept of least privilege and what we're thinking about here, this is a little bit longer term, but trying to use the data model to figure out. There's 3 elements of access. There's what you can do, what you have access to, and what you should be able to do. And we foresee a future where those 3 circles come together so that in real time the data, you know, the example that I would use is that if there's 9 finance people who work for a finance director, my access posture should be modeled based on what my peers are doing. And then maybe I have that access. And then why would I need to call the help desk and ask for more access if I already have it? It's a massive, and the other part of this is from a should perspective. I'm going to say one more thing. I'm out of time here. The amount of money that we spend as corporations on things like access certifications is extraordinary. Tens of millions of dollars in most companies. So having a data model answer those questions for us, first and foremost, is really important. Thank you all. Stop by booth 780 if you want to talk about this more, and appreciate your attention. Thank you.